Hello there and welcome. This is Draco and today I'll be doing a Merfolk Primer. I've gotten some requests for this for some time and I wanted to do this because I think it's a great way of getting in depth with each card and talk about this wonderful deck that is Mono Blue Merfolk. So I think we're gonna have a fun time today. We're gonna go through all the cards that Mono Blue typically run. We're gonna talk about why they are great, how they work in conjunction with each other, and which small tips and tricks you need to be aware of when playing these cards. So a little disclaimer, of course, I'm primarily focusing on the cards that I use a lot. So if you have some niche card that you don't, that you use and I don't, feel free to put them in the description. Maybe those cards is something we can have a discussion about. But since I am not playing with some cards, then I won't go in depth with those because I don't have the necessary experience with those necessarily. So, but if there's anything you feel that is missing, let me know in the comments and saying, hey Draco, I need to talk about this specific card. But I think this has been something that I've been thinking about a long time because I think it makes a lot of sense. When we play with Merfolk, there's a lot of small interactive element that each card have, but there's a lot of different options you have continuously. So I think it makes sense to discuss these cards individually and go through them. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to start with the 1-drops all the way up to the creatures. Then I'm going to talk about everything I see in the main deck as primary cards as I've been playing them. We're going to talk about, of course, the lands. Merfolk got a lot of interesting lands in this deck. And of course, we're also going to talk about some of these sideboard options. Especially in the sideboard, I'm not going to go through all cards because there's so many different options. But I'll go through some of the cards I prefer at the moment and let me know if there's anything else you want to hear about. And of course, if you like the Merfolk content, give a like to this video, subscribe to my channel, and in the description here in the video, there's also links for my Twitter. Follow me on Twitter if you want to see when I do streams live and play this deck. So, but let's just get into it. The first card up is the Tideshaper. What a great card! I love this addition from Modern Horizons 2, and I think actually this is one of the best cards in the deck at the moment. This is one of the cards that really has a big impact on the meta. 1 mana, 1/1, that you have a kicker for 1 colorless. That's actually really important. And when it's kicked, target land becomes an island for as long as the Tideshaper remains on the battlefield. And if an opponent has an island in play, it becomes gets +1/+1, becoming a 2/2. And of course, bigger if you have something to buff it up. But really great card. One of the things that's important about this card is not really a 1-drop because you want to use the kicker a lot, especially in Modern, where there's a lot of spell lands and interesting lands you wanna try to deal with. So yes, thank you Wizards for giving us a great 1-drop, but it's not a 1-drop all the time. It's typically a 2-drop. But so you want to use the kicker a lot. But when you use it against a blue mage that have no lands in particular that you want to remove, one of the things I found really good with this card is that then it can just become a 2/2 aggressor for 1 mana, and especially against blue mages, we need aggression. We need to put pressure on. So actually, I think that it's a great card design. It gives a lot of outs to different difficult cards that other decks are running. But against a blue mage, which are typically controlling mages, you want to get this down as a 2/2 beater and just get in there. This is also a reason that I like the card, because it's flexible. Of course, be aware when you deploy it, are you missing out on value? Can you do something about the opponent's lands? Is there something like important that you need to take out? And if there's not, let's just get it in there as a beater. Before Modern Horizons 2, this was Spreading Seas, which I'm going to talk about later, was one of the reasons why the deck really functioned well, because we had the option of even though the opponent didn't have islands, we could then get an island in play on their side, which means that all the lords that we're also going to talk about later gives all the Merfolk island walk ability. And that's why that effect is so important. It's not only to take out lands or to mana screw your opponent, it's also because you combined with lords, this makes your team unblockable. So really, really strong effect. And and that's why the Tideshapers often are also good late game as a top deck draw, because you'll be able to get through all your damage. Another thing you can do here is that we're going to talk about Ethervial, which is a hugely important card in the Merfolk deck. Ethervial allows us to cheat in creatures for free, and because Tideshaper is one of the best one-drops that has 1 CMC in its cost, we can actually often put in this really early from the Ethervial. And don't be afraid to do this if you got a meaningful block on something like an opposing Ragavan, or even blocking a Dragon Rage Challenger, which is sometimes only a 1/1 when you attack in. So I think this can actually sometimes surprise people, because everybody looks on Merfolk expecting 2 drops coming out of the Ethervial, but here there's something we can cheat out earlier. Some of the key targets you need to be aware of with Tideshaper is, of course, Urza's Saga. Urza's Saga is an amazing land that allows our opponents to totally go off on value, creating multiple threats, creatures, and also getting value from something they draw later, like, for example, the spear that gives him lifelink. So, of course, really important to take out Urza's Saga. What happens when you use this on Urza's Saga is that Urza's Saga actually simply goes to the graveyard. So make sure that you identify if your opponent is running Urza's Saga in their deck. Many lists typically do when they are specific types of list, and you can see, okay, this guy looks like he's a Jund player, this guy looks like he might be Hammer Time on an artifact-based deck, he'll probably have Urza's Saga. Then your Tideshaper should be in your hand as a resolution for the Urza's Saga. Really great answer to that. It's also great against Tron. Tron tries to combine 3 specific lands to great value and can play down big threats. So with the Tideshaper, you can take out one of the lands and do that before, of course, that they can get it up and running. So you got some time when they have the second land down. Now you need to move with the Tideshaper. You need to make one of the lands into an island. And another thing, when we play Modern, there's a lot of greedy mana bases, and you also have the option of taking off crucial mana sources from your opponent with Tideshaper. Just be aware that when you do that, let's imagine that an opposing player has something like a Steam Vents, and you want to take him off red mana, for example. Let's imagine the Steam Vents is untapped, you play this and you target the Steam Vents. He'll be able to tap it for red, killing off your Tideshaper in response, nullifying the entire effect. So be aware of that. Another thing you should be aware of, that's sometimes when you try to deny people mana, you actually give them the blue mana they need sometime. So also think about that. Is he stalling on blue, then I might not want to play out my Tideshaper now, giving him an out here. This is actually hugely important, being aware of that as well. But great deck, or great card, Tideshaper. Another card we want to talk about today is, of course, an Honorary Merfolk. It's Ethervial. And Ethervial is a really cool card, because it's an artifact originally printed all the way back from Darksteel. We can see the original printing here. Let's see that one. That's my personal favorite. And Ethervial is a 1 mana artifact. It's our best turn 1 play, because each turn it'll tick up. You can choose yourself if you want to tick it up or no, and you can then use it to tap it and put on a creature with converted mana cost equal to the number of charge counters. So you play it down, in your upkeep, you put a counter on. Now you have the entire turn, including your opponent's turn, to put down a 1-drop in from Ethervial. Next turn, 2-drop, you can put that in, and then you can choose to move on. And a little neat trick you can do is that each upkeep you put this trigger on the stack. You can actually get the trigger on the stack. Let's imagine you have something like a Glasspool Mimic in hand that you want to be able to put in late, and you only have 1 2-drop left in the hand. So now you just want to get the 2-drop out and then go up to 3. So what you can actually do is that you can untap, trigger on the stack, put down the 2-drop, it goes up to 3. Yeah, it's tapped, but now you manage to put down a 2-drop even though you're sticking it up, maybe because you want to get fast up to Subtlety or something like that for the next turn. Important to remember that. Typically, in many Mono Blue lists, you want to keep this on 2 often. Sometimes you top deck a Silvergill Addict with no Merfolks in hand. We're going to talk about Silvergill Addict, but the Silvergill Addict is an important card advantage engine for Merfolk, but it only works and functions well if you have a Merfolk in hand. And if you don't, you have the out of using Ether Vial on 2 to get it down and still draw a card on it. We'll talk about that card later, but in general, Ether Vial is really good on 2. You need to be aware, when do you put it up on 3? Why does that make sense? And it's not all the time a good idea to do so. Sometimes I find that if you have the winning play, or you have like a strong 3-drop and you are out of 2-drops, because you can push the advantage, get it up on 3, especially if you only have like 2 mana out, and that's the only way you can play it. But this deck is filled with 2-drops, so it's typically best on 2. Another thing, this is uncounterable threats, so the opponents won't be able to counter anything we do here. That's hugely important. So make sure that understanding this is really good to get in early against control decks, because they won't be able to counter the threat we put in here. Yes, it's a great starting in your starting hand. It's less good in multiples, but it's really good in your starting hand. But the negative side about Ether Vial is that it's actually a really bad late game draw. Imagine you sitting there looking for an important answer like a Lord of Atlantis, something you need to push down the damage, and now you draw an Ether Vial. It's slow to get online at that point in the game. You maybe have your mana already. So the risk of playing Ether Vial is, of course, it's a bad late game draw. But it does allow for really explosive draws. Some of the things that we can do is that we can play an Ether Vial on 1. In turn 2, we can play something like a Silvergill Addict. And on turn 3, we can play, because now we have the Ether Vial up on 2, we can play both a Lord and copy a Lord with Glasspool Mimic, attacking in for 4 on turn 3. Really strong, and deploying your board really fast with Ether Vial. It is really a strong card. And I think one of the cards that when you have the right not draw, it's with Ether Vial on 1. Another thing it allows us to do is to use our Lords as combat tricks. We're going to talk about the Lords a lot because they're hugely important, but they give all the Merfolks +1/+1. And that's important. So sometimes you can attack in, heal block, and you can put in a Lord from the Ether Vial as a combat trick. One of the things I actually did yesterday was that I was playing a game where I had a couple of Lords out, and my Lords were attacking as 3/3s unblockable. And my opponent was used a Lightning Bolt on one of the Lords attacking in, and I could then Ether Vial a Lord, getting the Lord he was targeting. That was actually a Master of the Pearl Trident, but that Master he was targeting with the Lightning Bolt suddenly had 4 toughness, and it was unblockable. So kind of like his Lightning Bolt just fizzled, right? A little neat trick, especially for when you play live, is that this is a trigger you need to remember. If you forget it, you draw a card, you missed the ball. It's a May ability. So a good little neat trick is that when you play live, what you do is that you have on the top, you play down the Ether Vial on 1, because of course we always draw it. Then you take a dice and you place it on top of your library. So when you go to draw in next upkeep, oh, there's a dice there. And then you know, no, I'm not supposed to do anything. I need to take this dice and put it on my Ether Vial. And I'll just do that again. I'll just put another dice next turn, because I need to remember these triggers. Really good trick. So do that, because it's a pain to forget the trigger, and it's just how it is. If you forget the trigger, that's how it is. Okay, that's moving on to the 2-drop spot. The first card I want to talk about is one of my personal favorites. It's the Silvergill Addict. And the Silvergill Addict is a great magic card. It's a 2/1 for 1 blue and a 1. And when you play it, you can either reveal a Merfolk from your hand, or you can pay 3. That's the additional cost. But when it enters the battlefield, you draw a card. This is a card from Lauren, and I prefer the original art here. But that's, of course, just up to taste. But the reason why this card is really good is that it allows us to deploy threats while maintaining card parity with our opponents. And yes, a measly 2/1, that's just really not that strong. You can argue that, and there's things like Ren 6 that can take it out really easily. Yeah, that is all correct. But imagine you putting down a Lord. Suddenly this measly little 2/1 becomes a 3/2 unblockable in many cases. So that's why this card is really good. And I like to use it as my first deployment card before the Lords, because when you play the Lord, you'll get instant speed value from buffing the Silvergill Addict. And one of the things that's important when playing this is which Merfolk do you actually reveal? So think about that when you play the Silvergill Addict. You're revealing something for your opponent. You're going to give him some information. So what do you want to reveal? I like to reveal another Adept if I have one, because I think that's really low impact level of knowledge for him. I don't think that makes that much difference that he knows that I have another Silvergill Adept. A Lord you can also use to see. Yeah, of course. The problem with showing the Lord is that, he can then buff the team, but when playing against Merfolk, you kind of expect people to have Lord of Atlantis or Master of the Pearl Trident in hand. Some lists are running 8 Lords in total, so it's not that big of a stress factor. Some of the cards you want to avoid showing is, of course, Tide Chipper. Imagine you show the Tide Chipper and suddenly he looks at his Ursa Saga saying, I don't want to get this one down. I need to play around Tide Chipper. Tide Chipper, try to save that if possible. Another thing is to not show the Merfolk Trickster. Merfolk Trickster, we're going to talk about that. It's one of the best interactive cards we have, but it's best because it had flash as a surprise attack. So we don't want to show the Trickster when we can use it meaningfully. And another thing, when you play down the Adept, there's many situations where you play down the Adept and you know you're going to play a Master of the Pearl Trident or a let's imagine you just play a Tide Chipper right after. If you know you're going to play potentially a Merfolk right after, just show the one you're going to play right after, because again it gives the least amount of advantage. We talked about keeping the Vial on 2. This is exactly why, because sometimes you'll draw this late without Merfolks in hand. It's really clunky and expensive at that point, but if you have a Vial on 2, you will be able to draw out of it. Okay, and now we go to the next card on the 2-drop spot, and we're gonna clump these together. This is, of course, Lord of Atlantis. Lord of Atlantis, which is a real original card, and we're gonna clump it together with the Master of the Pearl Trident, because these two cards have really similar effects. Lord of Atlantis was from the original Magic set way back in 1993. And then they created a version of an updated version of it in I think it originally was created in 2013 in an M13 set here. So this allows us to have 8 of the similar effects. This is really important. But there's a key difference between the two cards. Notice that Master of the Pearl Trident says other Merfolk creatures you control get +1/+1 and have Island Walk. Okay. You control. That's the key part. If you look at Lord of Atlantis, it says in the Oracle text, because it's been errated sometimes, other Merfolk get +1/+1 and have Island. So it's all Merfolk. Okay, that's actually really important. That's really important. We'll get back to that. I just want to see if we can see the really old school version. We want to see here back from. This is really old. Here you can see this is how old the original card was. This is the limited edition alpha Lord of Atlantis printing. So I love this old school card. And originally it said summon Lord of Atlantis, and it said all Merfolk can play gain Island Walk and +1/+1. But it wasn't then Merfolk itself. Really funny. But it's been errated, so now it is a Merfolk. So it does get the buff from all the others. So let's just see it. I use the revised version, but yeah, that's absolutely fine. But some things you need to be aware of when playing these cards here is that Lord of Atlantis and Master of the Pearl Trident is great because it'll buff up your team, but they're not necessarily great on their own. Then they are 2-mana 2/2. You need to deploy them sometimes, but it's not necessarily the best early play. It's better when you have a couple of creatures out, because then you get some value instantaneously. Some of the things you need to be aware of when comparing the two Merfolks is that I think many people prefer the Master of the Pearl Trident because it only gives your Merfolk +1/+1. This means that in the mirror matchup, if you play against another Merfolk player, this is actually more, you can say, safe, because it doesn't buff his team and give them Island Walk, which is crazy scary. But I actually think that currently the Lord of Atlantis is better, and this is simply because of Ragavan. Ragavan, the really popular 1-mana 2/1 in red, will take a top card from your library, and sometime you can play it. And sometime it'll be able to play some crazy threats from us But if they play the Lord of Atlantis from the Ragavan trigger, it gives all your Merfolk +1/+1 and Island Walk, and many of these decks, they have islands themselves, so it's really risky for them to play that specific card. That's why when I adjust my deck in sideboarding against the Ragavan deck, I want to keep in my Lord of Atlantis, taking out the Master of the Pearl Trident if I need to adjust that way. Some of the things that these masters allow us to do is that we can have a really potent draws, potent aggression, a couple of rounds where we can go from them having a lot of life to actually going totally dead in 2 turns. So do the math. Go in here, you play down the 1 Lord, you maybe have a Lord and a Glasspool Mimic copy a Lord effect. So you know you can Lord next turn. So you can Lord and you can hit them for, let's say you can hit them for 6 damage right away with 2 Silvergill Addicts or something like that. And then if you can double Lord next turn, now you're suddenly hitting them for each of the Addicts hitting for 5 each, and you can have the Lord hitting for 4. And so it's typically a numbers game. Figure out, can I win in 2 turns? I have this great draw with these Lords and the Ether Vial and stuff like that. If I do this, I can go really aggressive and try to win in 2 turns and surprise him like that. So do the math. And you can definitely, when you sideboard, side a couple of them out, because I think it's a great top deck. But if you want to go a bit more controlish, they are also really narrow. And when you're going a bit more controlish, you can definitely side a couple of Lords out. That's fine. Yes. And one of the things that I found a lot is that when you looking at your different threats in hand and you want to find out, am I deploying a master here or am I deploying a trickster in its end step? Typically, if you only have 1 master in hand, save it, because that is going to be relevant in some time, being able to play a master. So just be aware of that. So much love to Lord of Atlantis and Master of the Pearl Trident. These guys are great. But this card coming up here is hugely important for the deck. Merfolk Trickster does a lot of different things. It's a 2/2 flash for 2 blue mana. And when it comes down, it taps a creature an opponent control. So you can only tap an opposing creature. But the important thing that creature, it also loses all abilities on a final turn. This is hugely important. But let's look at some utilizations of Merfolk Trickster. First of all, it's a tempo card. You can tap down an opposing aggressor, giving yourself a creature more to attack with next turn, and he will lose a blocker. And now you can go in for a lot of beating. Now you are on the aggression, and he needs to stay back and block. It also allows you to hold up counter magic. One of the interesting things about Merfolk is that we do have a lot of counter magic. And one of the annoying things when holding up counter magic is that when he just goes to his end step. But now you have something to do actually. Now you can play that on the Trickster. So one of the reasons why the Trickster is nice is that it gives you something to do so you still keep deploying creatures. It can of course also tap down a annoying blocker. You want to get in there, you have not managed to get Island Walk unblockable, but now you can tap down his tricky blocker and then go in there. But removing abilities is some of the most important things about this. Because removing abilities can be so important against many creatures in the meta game. So of course this can change a little over time, but it's going to be really important in general. One of the big things right now is construct tokens. Construct tokens are being created by especially Urza's Saga, the land that can create 2 before it goes to the graveyard. So you're going to see a lot of construct tokens. Urza himself, the High Lord Artificer, which is a legendary 4 mana blue card, also creates a construct token. The construct token says it's a 0/0 and it gets +1/+1 for all artifacts in play. Okay, all artifacts in play. That's important because when you then remove that ability, it's simply a 0/0. So Trickster actually kills off an opposing construct. That's really important. Another thing is the Scourge of the Skyclaves, which is one of the things that some shadow decks are using. You can see here, Scourge of the Skyclaves. This card here. And Scourge of the Skyclaves says that its power and toughness are equal to 20 minus the highest total among players. But if you remove the effect, it dies. It's a 0/0. So also really, really strong from Merfolk Trickster. I like that interaction as well. Another thing that's important is that you can tap down something in upkeep that could be annoying through his turn by creating value. Imagine, for example, a Mana Dork doing this. That's a really important thing. Like something like at Ignoble Hierarch when you're playing against Yawgmoth. That's actually really important because you can maybe hold him off Yawgmoth for a turn. You can also tap down something like Dryad of the Elysian Grove, which is another card that allows all his lands to... I forget I said that. But there's many different things. And of course, you can also just simply tap down a Ragavan. That's going to be a nuisance for you. Another cool little trick is that one of the strongest cards in the meta right now is the Dragon Rage Channeler. The 1-mana 1/1 red creature that's really easily can get Delirium and thereby being a 3/3 flying threat. But when he attacks in, and he must attack in each turn, you can play down the Trickster, removing all abilities from the Dragon Rage Channel. This includes flying and the +2/+2, so now it's simply a 1/1, and then you can block it with Trickster. This is a combo all on its own, and I really like the fact that you can take care of that one, so thank you for that one. A card that I also really like is, of course, Harbinger of the Tides. Harbinger of the Tides. This is a really cool card as well. Also a tempo card. I don't think it's as prevalent in people's Mono Blue lists at the other 4 2-drops, but it does see some play, and it does have a right now in the meta game, especially at the moment. But a 2-mana 2/2, but when it comes down, you may return target tapped creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. So a bounce effect, but this is really good because a 2-mana 2/2 that'll be able to bounce something is a decent tempo play. But where it really gets strong is doing it in your opponent's turn. And you can do that by playing 2 more mana. So if you play, let's say that your opponent attacked with a big creature like a Murktide that he's buffed up all the way and exiled his entire graveyard. Now he attacks in. Or it's let's imagine you are playing against an opposing a Hammer Time deck, and suddenly they go off with all the combo and play down a big hammer on the Ornithopter. Now you can pay 2 extra mana, and now Harbinger has flash. You can tap. You can choose the Ornithopter, bouncing back to hand, or you can choose a Murktide, bouncing it back to the hand. But where it really shines is in combination with Aethervial. We talked about that card before, because when Aethervial has 2 counters, now you can tap it, put down the Harbinger, and you can bounce his creature back to hand. I really like that interaction, and I think that's why Harbinger is a great card, because of course 4 mana is pretty steep in Modern Magic, but it's good to have that out as well. And sometimes you can also just play it out on 2, bouncing his Dragon Rage Channeler to get a little bit of the tempo. And of course, it's a Merfolk, so cool card. I really like it. And now we get to our 3-drop spot, and here we have Sverlun of Sea and Sky, and you can get this beautiful Merfolk card in different printing as well. We have the full art here. You can see really pretty. You can also have an old border version, which is also really nice. I'm kind of into the classic look and feel of this one as well, but Sverlun is a great addition to Merfolk, and I actually think that without this card we would be missing the oomph to fight the big decks. And I think that Sverlun is a really well designed card. It's also from Modern Horizons 2, so a recent addition to the deck, and it's a 3 mana 2 blue and 1 pip 3/4. Let's stop there. 3 mana, 3/4. That's really good because 4 toughness means that we won't get killed off by Lightning Bolt or Lightning Helix. Many of the burn spells, also like Searing Blaze, stuff like that, gives 3 damage. So really good to have 4 toughness. That's thumbs up for that. That's really strong. Another thing is that the 3 CMC also means that Fatal Push and Prismatic Ending can be difficult to use to kill it. Prismatic Ending, that will work often, but it's still Fatal Push, difficult to Fatal Push. You need to crack your fetch land to use Fatal Push on it. So it has some inherent protections like that. That's why it's a good card. It's a legendary, but many people run 4 anyways, simply because it's so good. Another thing that Sverlun is interesting is that it has indestructible as long as you control at least 2 other Merfolk. And in this deck, it's really important and easy to get that up and running. And of course, some of the cool things you can do with Sverlun is that you can surprise people. So let's imagine that you have 1 Merfolk out, and suddenly your opponent tries to block this or kill it off with Fury, for example? Well, you can maybe violin another Merfolk. You can maybe use Trickster to put it in, or sometimes you can even activate a Mutavault without people have noticed that. So that's actually really, really strong. So the indestructible part is really great. It also gives Sverlun the option of being a blocker sometimes. And of course, really important also against some of the mass removal. So especially when you play against Azorius control or something where you know they have a wrath effect, it's really important to make sure that you can trigger her indestructibility. But don't get too blindsided on the indestructible. I think one of the things that you can risk in with Sverlun is that you can sometimes it'll just sit in hand because you sit there on 3 mana. He just killed off my Merfolk, or I only have one Merfolk out right now. So if I play Sverlun, you'll be vulnerable. But you can't be too nervous about that. If she doesn't get out there, she doesn't want to. She's not going to create value for you. So feel free to put her out there when that makes sense. Really important with Sverlun as well is that when she attacks, she draws you a card, and that's really, really strong. So it's not when you hit something with Sverlun, it's when you attack. So when you attack in, you'll draw a card right away. That's also a trigger you need to remember. So because if you attack and he goes to blocks your opponent, especially this is of course in Paper Magic, that trigger is actually gone. You need to remember that one. So be sure to remember that when you say attack, go get that card. We got to get the value. And that's why Sverlun is so strong, because it allows us to get back from some play states where we might are down on cards. But if we can resolve a Sverlun, she will run away with the game by having these draw effects. And another really, really cool effect is that she also protects all the other Merfolk. She is the guard of the Merfolk. So that makes a lot of sense, because she actually grants all the other Merfolk Ward 1. And Ward 1 is a really nicely designed effect, and it's stronger than it might feel. It means that when you target a spell or ability an opponent controls targets another Merfolk, it'll be countered unless that player pays 1. And people will forget this. So you need to remember this. You need to remember, especially when playing in paper, that when they're targeting your master with a lightning bolt, you say, that's fine. The trigger goes on a stack, Ward 1, will you pay the mana? And maybe he can't. Sometimes they forget, and maybe he can, but then he'll, have to use their mana. And one of the things that's important about that is that imagine you have a Fury in hand, or maybe they go off with some combo where they can grape shot multiple of your Merfolk. They need to pay 1 mana for each target. So really, really important effect here. And Sverlun allows us to protect our team, and I think actually the Ward 1 is really important. Remember that this is not something you can do where you can't either violin Sverlun and counter the effect from Ward with Ward 1. So imagine a situation where he taps out his last red mana to kill off your master, and you put in Sverlun, think you're tricky. You are tricky, but it doesn't work. That creature will already be targeted. As soon as the guy plays the mana and targets, that creature is targeted, and you can't do anything about that. So sometimes it's really good to get the Sverlun out early, because then it protects the team. But make sure that you also understand when does it make sense to protect the team and when does it not. Imagine a situation where you have a couple of Merfolks out and he is untapped with mana, and you sit there with his Sverlun in hand considering, should I just play this out to protect my creatures? Well, if you do that, he can shoot them in response. So many times it's often correct to attack first with the creatures out there, so get in a couple of points of damage, and then you play the Sverlun, because then he needs to use the removal spells right away. So think about when you play it. It's good to get him out early, but not in a situation where he will then stop himself from getting damaged by your creatures. But Sverlun is a great, great card. Don't be afraid to attack with the Sverlun and play down the other Sverlun, sacking the existing one to have a blocker. That also becomes relevant sometimes. You can definitely do that. And Sverlun is one of the primary reasons why we sometimes get the Ether Vial up on a 3. But a great, great, great card, and really powerful in many situations. Some of the threats you need to be aware of taking out Sverlun is especially something like March of Otherworldly Light, the instant speed removal from the newest Neon Dynasty set, and Prismatic Ending. So white has 2 creatures, 2 spells that is really prevalent in the metagame that can simply just exile Sverlun. And if they exile Sverlun, we can't do anything about it. We have no ward protection, and we have no way of protecting it against Solitude either. So if you're playing against a white player, don't think too much about the indestructible part, because he'll just be able to exile it with those kinds of effects. And now we go to a couple of other interesting cards that are not Merfolks, but that are Honorary Merfolks. And the first is something that I would say is a somewhat invitational Merfolk card. Kira, Great Glass Bearer, is also a card that it's an original printing in the original Betrayers of Kamigawa, and it's not a Merfolk, it's a spirit, but it does have some interesting effects protecting your Merfolk. And many people are playing this card. I sometimes have one in the sideboard, sometimes I play one in the main deck. So this is not one of the most frequent cards, and I don't play it at the moment. But I think it deserves an honorable mention simply because it has a really potent effect. And I want to combine that with Sverlun because it's also a way of protecting your team. So Kira is also a legendary creature. It costs 2 and 1, so it's a 3 mana 2/2 flyer. Flying is important because actually flying is really good. This means that this will often be unblockable. So yeah, it doesn't get the effect from the Lords of being unblockable from the Island Walk, but it does have evasion on its own. And what it has as an effect is that all creatures, also Kira, have, whenever this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability for the first time in a turn, counter that spell or ability, which is really, really strong. So imagine that you have this out and they want to kill off Kira. They need to use 2 removal spells on it. And that is giving you a 2-for-1. So really great way of protecting your team. Really great way of getting this out early because it'll just be card disadvantage for your opponent. I like the card and I think it actually is decent at the moment. It's always something you can consider playing. But again, the same as with Sverlun, this effect, it doesn't work if you use it like instant speed Kira put in and then say, oh, I counter your ability. Because when the triggers on the stack, when they have targeted the ability, then you can't counter it with Kira. So be aware of that, that's really important. The next card we're going to talk about here is Subtlety, and Subtlety is not a Merfolk either. But Subtlety is becoming one of the most played cards in Mono Blue Merfolk across the line. It's a really important card at the moment in the current iteration, one of my favorite additions from Modern Horizons 2, and it's a part of the Elemental cycle. So they made this entire Elemental cycle, which are all really potentially strong creatures. It's all creatures that cost between 3 to 5 mana. And they have a couple of abilities, but then you can evoke them. You can evoke them by exiling a card with same color as the card. And then you can evoke it, which means then it just dies. So Subtlety is a 4 mana 3/3 flyer with flash. And when it enters the battlefield, you can choose up to 1 target creature spell or planeswalker spell, and its owner puts it on the top or the bottom of their library. So yeah, they will be able to take that card and put it back on top. But we're gonna get to that. It's really, really strong still. When it was first spoiled in the fall of last year, 2021, all these elementals, people were looking at them and people were hyping Subtlety the most. And it was the one that originally got the least amount of playtime. I think people misunderstood the power of this card and thought it was like a Force of Will type effect where you'll just be able to hard counter it. But one of the things that I found about this effect is that it's really great, of course, having a 4 mana 3/3 where the effect happens. That's really great itself. That's fine because you also have a 3/3 flyer. Really, really nice. But you need to be able to use the tempo swing that this actually provides us with. So what happens is that when you use the Subtlety, you are often gonna 2-for-1 yourself. One of the things that's really, really strong is that it's a great answer to all the other elementals, the Fury and the Solitudes, which are some of the strongest cards against us. It'll take out our Sverlun, it'll Fury can remove multiple of our creatures by dealing 4 damage combined, or put all the way where he wants to. And then the Subtlety can actually take that Fury and put it back on top. But the Fury is going to come back. So that's the thing that's important here, is that when you then 2-for-1 yourself by exiling a blue card from your hand, and you put that back on top, you need to be able to use the tempo. And Merfolk can do that. Control decks, where Subtlety originally was intended to be played, for many people thought that this could be used in a control deck, then the tempo swing can't be used, and they'll just take the threat back and play it again. But here, imagine you play against Tron, and they resolve a big threat, a big Planeswalker, Ugin or something, the Spirit Dragon, something like that, a really, really big threat. For 7 mana, they tap out, they go all in, and then you just play Subtlety and putting it back on top. Next turn, you can attack in for lethal or something. So you're using the tempo swing, and that is really, really important, and that's why Subtlety is a great addition to Merfolk. You always have something to pitch also, as we're playing Mono Blue here. It's really easy to have something that you can just throw away. You can even throw away something like a Glasspool Mimic, which we're going to talk about a bit later, which is the modal card, which is a land and a clone effect on the other side, and pitching that to Subtlety is really, really great. Some of the things that you need to be aware of is that this effect says when it enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target creature or spell, but it's not a spell itself, or it is a spell, but it's not a counter spell. So one of the situations where Subtlety is really good is against something like Primeval Titan. Amulet Titan play Primeval Titan as a huge win condition, and they use Cain of Souls so that the Primeval Titan is uncounterable. They will name Giant, because Primeval Titan has Giant, and then they'll tap out and say, I got this uncounterable threat. And then you say, yeah, you thought so, but I have Subtlety. I won't counter it, but you can put it back on top. And then you can, of course, do something crazy like using the tempo again. That's really, really strong application of this card. It's really important to protect yourself from also big Planeswalkers. And also, in many matchups, you actually get to resolve this. And another thing why this is so strong is that if you look at all the other elementals, the Solitude is a 3/2 lifelink, the Endurance is a 3/4 reach, the Fury is a 3/3 double strike. All these kinds of creatures, if you look at the power toughness and ability ratio, I would much rather, as a Merfolk player, have a 3/3 flyer. As we talked with Kira, flying is great, it's evasion, and if I don't play Merfolks, I want my creatures to have evasion so I can get in with some damage. The Merfolks is typically going to have evasion because of the Island Walk, but that's why the Subtlety is great, because it also provides damage output. So you can get this in and you can put out damage output. Some of the things you need to be aware of as well, it's small tricks you can do. Subtlety means that you will exile a blue card from your hand, but it'll go to the graveyard. So you can actually imagine you play against Living End, which are going to take all the creatures from play, put them into the graveyard, and all the graveyard creatures are coming in to play. Well, Subtlety, if you're sitting there with your hand, you can actually pitch Subtlety simply to get it into the graveyard, and then you have a 3/3 flyer. I know it's not much, but it's a small trick, and keep that in mind. You can do that. If people play Dress Down, another important spell, that means that no creatures have any abilities, the Subtlety will stay in play. It won't do the effect of the into the battlefield, but it will stay in play. So it's not that bad if people use Dress Down against you when you evoke your Subtlety, because it'll stay in play. So really neat. Another thing is that Subtlety is one of the main reasons why we want to tick up our Ether Vial sometimes. I know I've been talking about Ether Vial, something that you consider holding it on to, but getting it up to 4 is so strong. When you can Ether Vial in a Subtlety, it is really, really important, because you can do something with your mana, you can attack with your Muda Walls, and now you can use the Ether Vial to put in the Subtlety, and having this effect work out really well. Some situations you can also use Subtlety really aggressive. Let's imagine you hold a hand, you don't know who you're playing against, and you have a bit of a slow hand, and you want to draw. This guy plays a Ragavan, and you just think, oh my lord, now this pesky monkey is going to run away with the game, he's going to hit us in, he's going to play down Sverluns or something from the top of our deck, we can't handle it. Then Subtlety on an early Ragavan like that is actually something you can consider. I know it seems completely aggressive to do, but in situations where you will be run down otherwise, sometimes think about when do you Subtlety aggressively. And I think this is some of the things where we are really put it to the skill test as players. I also like the alternative art here. Really nice. Get those if you want to have a bit of spice like that. But Subtlety is a great card, and I think right now many players are running either 3 or 4 in the 75 lists. So really great card. And if you have any things you want to put in as a comments to other cool applications of Subtlety, feel free to put it down there. Last thing I want to say about Subtlety is that imagine you hold up Subtlety with the 4 mana and they don't play anything. Don't be afraid to just play it as a 3/3 flyer. It's so strong to get a phantom monster in the game and getting to beat them down. Okay, so now we go to a bit of some of our non-creature spells. One of the things we want to talk about first is Spreading Seas, one of the original cards here. Spreading Seas is an old enchantment from Zendikar. 1 blue, 1 mana, enchant land. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, and enchant land is an island. So, of course, there's big parallels to Tidechipper, and of course, Tidechipper is also like a kind of modern design for Spreading Seas. Why I like Tidechipper is because you are swapping in or exchanging the 1 card you drew from Spreading Seas with a body on the ground. And yes, that body is more vulnerable. That's why the Spreading Seas is a good card, because it's more difficult to get rid of the Spreading Seas effect. But the 2/2 body Merfolk is really strong to get online and get in play. So be aware of that. And I think really Spreading Seas is a great card, because it means that you will put down Spreading Seas on one of his lands, and then you can attack unblockable with your creatures because you have the master effect. So really important card for the deck. A really important effect. Some people are not playing Spreading Seas anymore because they have Tideshippers. I still run a couple. And I think definitely they deserve spots in the list. One of the things you need to be aware of is that opposing lands, as we talked about the Tideshipper, there are some really important ones. Tron pieces, hit those out, really important. Urza Saga especially. And one of the things that's cool here is that even though the Urza Saga will go into the graveyard, when you play your Spreading Seas on it, you still get to draw your card. So remember to draw the card. The Spreading Seas effect is really nice that you also are able to just cycle it late game. It's not the worst top deck, because you are looking for something like a Trickster or a Lord as an effect, and you draw a Spreading Seas. That's annoying, but you can just cycle it. And so also be aware that sometimes you can choose to Spreading Seas or Tideshipper your own lands. Imagine that you have maybe something like a Waterlogged Grove or a File Islet, a pain land that you really can't, it's going to hurt you to use them, or something where you can't play, you don't have enough blue sources, so you want to maybe changing a Mutavault into a Spreading Seas, or maybe even something like, for example, when they play Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon, which is the effect where all non-basic lands becomes mountains. Then imagine that you can actually play and you have only 1 island, and this is annoying because you have a lot of lords that cost 2 blue mana. You can actually play the Spreading Seas on the Mutavault, for example, or one of the other non-basics you're running, maybe a Glasspool Shore that you played down. And it'll be the last effect that counts, so now it's an island again, and that's important. So yeah, great card. I like it. I still think it's important to have in the deck. Another really nice card is Force of Negation. Force of Negation is from the Modern Horizons 1, and it was a way of giving something to protect against some of the unfair effects that was running around. Force of Will is not legal in Modern, but we get Force of Negation. I love the art, by the way. Really cool. It's also a pretty expensive card. Be aware of that. I think it's around 70 euros or over $100. So, but anyway, great card. Force of Negation is 2 blue mana and 1, and you can counter target non-creature spell. And one of the actually things people forget is that when you counter a non-creature spell this way, it actually is exiled instead of putting it into graveyard. That's relevant more often than you think so. So be sure that the guy you counter the effects on is exiling them. That is all great, but the reason why Force Negation is so potent and powerful is that if it's not your turn, And remember that part, you cannot not do this in your own turn, but if it's not your turn, you may exile a blue card from your hand rather than pay this spell's mana cost. And the same as with Subtlety, we always have something to pitch because we have so many blue cards. It's easy for us to find something that we can get rid of in Merfolk. So really, really nice that you can just pitch something and then you can counter something without them knowing. Don't be too scared to use Force of Negation. Use it to protect a Sverlun, use it to protect a threat, because we can utilize the tempo in Merfolk, in Mono Blue Merfolk. We can definitely utilize the tempo. It's really good against some of the unfair decks that are running around. We see especially the Cascade decks where they play something like they play Cascade into Crashing Footfalls or Living End, and now you can actually use Force of Negation by exiling when they do that from for example, a Shardless Agent. So Force of Negation is great in this metagame right now because there's a lot of unfair things going on. There's a lot of really good Planeswalkers that can be annoying. It can always counter a Planeswalker, also really nice to know. So be aware of that effect. That's really, really nice to have. But when playing against these Cascade decks, they also play with Violent Outburst, the instant speed Cascade effect. And the smart guys, they play that in your turn, in your upkeep. And let's imagine that you are on turn 2, he's on turn 3, he passed to you, you untap your 2 mana with Force of Negation in hand, being so cocky and confident that you'll be able to counter everything in place. And now he plays the Violent Outburst, and you can't pitch a card because it's your turn now. So just remember to be aware of that. Also, you can't do it in your own turn. Just remember that also when you tap out and you attack in and they have a removal spell for Alert Lord, now you can't use Force of Negation at that time. But I think Force of Negation is a great card, but don't get too blindsided with it. You need to be able to counter something that's either really impactful or more expensive than Force of Negation, because countering Lightning Bolts is typically not a winning strategy. Yeah, you can counter a Prismatic Ending on a Sverlun to grant you an extra card next turn. That's great. Do that, definitely. But it's not something that you always want to keep in. So feel free to side them out when they're not good. And sometimes they're really not good. What I find is that the Subtleties and the Force of Negations are typically attacking two different types of decks. So either you are siding out the Subtleties or the Force of Negations and vice versa. So that's interesting. And also you can sometimes just pay the mana. Sometimes you can just pay the mana. And of course you can counter something in your own turn if you pay the mana for it. I love Force of Negation. It's a really important card, and actually say that even though it's expensive, I would say this is one of the most important cards for us to protect ourselves against the unfairness of some things, some of the combo decks, and also to protect against strong removal. So yeah. And then there's a couple of cards that I would just want to include before I go into sideboard, and this is some of the cards that are being used as interactive spells. Blue mages, we don't have that much when it comes to removal spells. So instead, people are using something like Dismembers and Gutshots, and I'm going to talk about both of the cards now. This is first Dismember, let's take that note first. But what is significant with both cards is that they are not blue, but we can use Phyrexian mana to pay the cost. So Dismember is 1 mana and 2 black Phyrexian, which means that you can pay the Phyrexian mana with either a black pip or 2 life. So that's why this card is, yes, it's great. It gives -5/-5 instant speed. What a great card. Amazing. But it's expensive to do it because you will need to pay the mana, 1 mana, and then you need to pay 4 life. Yeah, that is a bit rough. And I know that this can sometimes be game-breaking, especially if you are battling another deck that also attacking your life. But it is really, really good to have the ability to take off opposing important creatures. And the Dismember is strong because it allows us to take out a different set of creatures than the Gutshot does. Let's look at the Gutshot. The Gutshot is, as you can see, kind of similar. It's also with Phyrexian mana, you can pay 1 red mana or 2 life for the effect. But that actually means the Gutshot is entirely free when you play the 2 life instead, which is why the card is nice, because it'll come out of nowhere. The problem is that it only deals 1 damage, and that means that the Gutshot is really, really narrow. But there's a lot of 1 toughness creatures in Modern. You can take out Ragavan, Dragon Rage Channeler, maybe you can even take out something like a Memnite getting a big hammer on. You can take out something like yeah, there's a lot of different things like Ignoble Hierarch, for example, the Mana Dork for Yawgmoth decks. So there's many different creatures you can take out with this. But there's also some you can't. And Dismember allows us to get some outs against something like Omnath, Ursa, High Lord Artificer. Sometimes we can even take out Death Shadow. We can even take out something like a Murktide. So Dismember gives a bit more. I don't know, not all Merfolk players are playing these types of borrow cards when they borrow from the other colors. But I myself enjoy to have that as an option at least. And now we're going to talk a bit about the lands. And yes, you think, oh, that's going to be boring to talk about lands. That's so boring. But it's not. It's going to be really, really interesting because we actually have a lot of interesting lands here. The first one we're going to talk about is Cain of Souls. And Cain of Souls has different printings here. The original was from Everson Restored. And this is really nice for tribals. The reason being is that when you play it down as a land, you can choose a creature type. And you choose Merfolk, most often. Then you can tap it for 1 colorless mana. That's fine. But you can also tap it for 1 mana of any color to your mana pool and spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. And that's the important part, and that spell can't be countered. Okay, so now we're talking, because you'll be able to play against a controlling player, and he can't counter your threats. You could just play down the Lord for Lances, and he sits there with his counterspell saying, what can I do here? You can play down Sverlun, what can he do? Murktide is also running 4 counterspell, 3 Archmage's Charm. That's why I think actually Cain of Souls is really strong in general. It's also strong at the moment, but there's a drawback. And that's the reason why Mono Blue Merfolk are not running 4 Cain of Souls. Because it doesn't allow you to play some of the double blue cards that are not Merfolks. So you can't play something like Counterspell or Force Negation of this. And that is, of course, a drawback. You can play Subtlety either, because Subtlety is not a Merfolk. Then you need to be able to choose Elemental and stuff like that. And that gets a bit tricky. So there are some situations where Cain of Souls can be a liability. And that is why I think the right number is maybe 1 or 2. But really interesting. Another thing you could do with Cavern is that you are able to do something where, let's imagine you play a Chalice of the Void. We're going to talk about that card a bit later. But Chalice of the Void is a card that's really relevant because it hosts some of the opposing decks we don't like. This can be, for example, Living End, but also is really strong about against something like Murktide sometimes, or decks that has a lot of 1-drops, because you can play it and saying all 1-drops will be countered. But what happens when you play your Tideshaper then? Won't it be countered? Not if you use Cain of Souls. So Cain of Souls actually allows us to play around something like Chalice of the Void, which is really cool. A little effect on that one. So Cain, definitely cool card. I like to see it. And there are some situations where you don't name Merfolk. You can of course be tricky putting this down and mentioning like Fairy, and they're gonna be, oh, what's going on? Is there Brazen Borrow? What's gonna happen? Maybe just to trick them. So you can do some tricky plays sometimes. The next thing we're going to play about is one of my favorite Magic cards of all time. It's an island. Yeah. And of course, this has been done in many different printings, and I'm kind of teasing you guys now because of course you know about the island. Let's take an old one here. Oh, nice full art here. There's been a lot of island throughout the years. Well, let's just take this one. Wow, that's also a beaut, right? There's Beyond Death. There's many different takes on the island, and the reason why I just mention island is that sometimes when we have so many other things than islands, we have all other kinds of land that can produce blue. We sometimes forget that we need a certain amount of islands in the deck. And islands is important because of Blood Moon. There are people playing Blood Moon, and Blood Moon and islands gives us a way out of Blood Moon. But another thing that's islands is interesting is that it'll also give opposing Merfolk players unblockable. So be aware also that the islands can also be a drawback. But I like to have a certain amount of islands. I run 8 islands at the moment. I run islands from the original Ursa Saga set. Really nice version as well. But I think that you should just be aware of how many islands you want to run in the deck. I think there's a limit to how far you can go down, also when you're looking on all sorts of different other lands. Next card is Minamo School at Water's Edge from the original Champions of Kamigawa set. And Minamo is an interesting card because when you look at it, it's a legendary land that can tap for 1 blue, but doesn't have a drawback coming in. The only drawback with Minamo is that it's legendary. That's why we only run 1. So it's actually free to play in general, of course. Not minding the comment that just had about Blood Moon, but in general it is, and that's why it is correct to have a Minamo in your deck. And it has a really interesting effect because you can play 1 blue mana, tap it, and then you can untap target legendary permanent. That was semi-relevant for many years, but actually since the printing of Modern Horizons 2, where we got Sverlun in play suddenly, now it's extremely relevant because Sverlun is a great attacker because you draw a card, but it's also a great blocker because it often has indestructible. So remember to use this effect. People will forget it. Your opponents, they will forget it definitely. So they'll just look at Minamo saying, oh, he has all these weird lands. They can just produce blue mana. It doesn't matter. And then suddenly he'll swing in and you'll just untap your Sverlun and block it and blow him out. So remember Minamo for untapping Sverlun. It comes up, and be aware that you forget you don't forget it in a crucial time. This could be a game-winning play to untap a Sverlun especially. We also have Oboro Palace in the Clouds, another card here that is from the Kamigawa block, Saviors of Kamigawa, and really nice art, by the way. I really love the art of Oboro here. And Oboro is an interesting land. I think there's many people talking to me and saying, okay, so Draco, what's actually going on with this land? Is this even good? Why do you people play this card? And again, it is because it's a free effect. It's a legendary land, so you only play 1, and you can tap it for blue. This is not as relevant, the effect that Oboro has. And I would say to you, if you want to say, I only have the option of playing 1 Minamo or Oboro, I would play Minamo every day of the week. But the effect is not irrelevant. What Oboro does is that you can play 1 colorless mana and then you can return it to your hand. That can be relevant. Let's imagine that you're opposing, of course, something with land destruction. It could be relevant, but people would be stupid to kill off Oboro or try when you have mana up. But that could be a relevant situation. Maybe they'll do something like full Minute Mage on your Oboro and you can bounce it back. You can even pay for the mana effect yourself and bounce it back. So that's a little neat trick you can do. You can also bounce it back to, let's say that something like Liliana say, Draco over there, can you please discard a card? I can, sir, but I don't want to discard my bombs in hand, so I can just pay 1 mana, put my Oboro up, and discard that one. Okay, pretty nice. That's also really good utilization of Oboro. And then the last thing is that you can use it to filter your mana a bit here. And that is actually pretty relevant. Sometimes it can be, it's rare it comes up, but imagine a situation where you have no lands in hand and you didn't draw land. You have a couple of creatures in play, and you have 3 islands and a Mono Vault. And you have 2 lords in hand, and these 2 lords, or maybe you have a lord and a trickster or something, and you have no island walk, and you want to play down both the lord and the Tapi's blocker, and then you can hit him for lethal or something, you know. Okay, in that specific case, it is annoying that the Mono Vault is not an island, but what you can do in that situation is that you can tap the 2 islands and the Oboro for blue mana. Then you tap the Mono Vault for colorless, taking your Oboro back to hand, putting your Oboro in play, and tapping your Oboro for blue mana. Then you filtered the colorless mana from the Mono Vault into a blue source. And now you produce 4 blue pips, 4 blue mana. And now you can play Lord of Atlantis, Trickster, tap down, hit for lethal. That's of course a dream scenario, but it can be relevant. So remember why Oboro is interesting and what it can be used for. Pretty neat sometimes. And talking about Mono Vault, let's go to my favorite card. One of my favorite cards at least. I think Mono Vault is a great card. I remember back in the days when they first created a man land. Let's just for history's sake look at this one. This is one of my favorite cards. Misra's Factory. Or we want to see an old one here. We want to see a really old one. Mistress Factory. You see, this is one of the original printings here. I got it on Italian. It's Italian. That should get another Italian. You can see Mistress Factory. This one. Oh, and I need to get the cool art. Back then they had different arts. You can see. The cool art is actually this one. This is really expensive. This one is really nice. If you get an original Mistress Factory with the snow art, it's 240 euros. This one originally from Antiquities. But this was the original mainland, a land that could be created into a 2/2, and then you could buff. The reason why you could do something to buff it. So that actually kind of similar to what Mutavault can do. Mutavault is like the updated version of Mistress Factory, because you can also pay 1 mana to get Mutavault into becoming a 2/2, and the same with Mistress Factory. You could pay 1 mana. You can use it to get a colorless mana. So the drawback of Mutavault is only colorless mana, but for 1 mana you can actually activate Mutavault into a 2/2. And Mistress Factory was great because you could use it to boost other Mistress Factories. You can even boost itself when you are blocking. Pretty neat. But Mutavault has another really interesting effect. It says that it becomes a 2/2 creature with all creature types, and that of course includes Merfolk. And this is why the card is so good, because first of all, it's just good to have manlands. Manlands are great. Manlands doesn't get killed by mass removal. It's difficult to handle against control. It lets you board out while still having, a threat later on, and you can do some neat tricks there. But buffing it from Lord of Atlantis and Master of the Pearl Trident is what really makes Mutavault great in this deck. And I see people, starting to take out Mutavault to play something like Archmage's Charm, and I can definitely see Archmage's Charm being interesting. I think it's too big a loss to lose Mutavault. Some of the things you can do here is that Mutavault will be your extra attacker for lethal sometimes. Sometimes you can just activate your Mutavaults and attack in, and because you can either vial, let's imagine you have 4 lands, 2 islands, 2 Mutavaults, and you have a vial on 2. Yeah, he might clear your board, but you can actually suddenly vial in a lord and activate. I have 2 3/3 unblockable creatures hitting him for 6 or killing off planeswalkers out of nowhere. I think Mutavault is a great card, and I really think that it's strong to have a manland that is interacting positively. Another neat trick we talked about with Sverlun is that you can use it to protect Sverlun. If you have a Mutavault, you'll be able to activate, also just activate it to itself. It doesn't really matter to get that Sverlun to be protected. That's important. But I really like Mutavault, and I think don't sleep on this card. I think it's great. And its original printing was in Morningtide, as you can see here, with a nice little fireball in the side there. So nice card. I like it. Next, we have our recent addition. We have Otawara Soaring City. Otawara is a new land from Neon Dynasty. And Neon Dynasty is the same plane as Kamigawa, of course. So it resembles some of the things we see in the deck already from Minamo and from Oboro. So remember Otawara here. Otawara is insane because it allows us to do something with when we flood out. And I think Otawara is stronger than both Minamo and Otawara. I think this is just a really good card. Let's go through what it does here. The same as we saw with Oboro and Minamo, you can put it down as a land and tap it for mana. And the only drawback is that it's a legendary land. Great. Then it has the channel ability. 3 mana and 1 blue, so 4 mana total. You can discard it, and then you can return target artifact, creature, enchantment, or planeswalker to its owner's hand. And this ability costs 1 less to activate for each legendary you control. So really potent effect. I like it. I really like to be able to bounce something. So, and the effect cast reduction is also really relevant sometimes, because we actually do have legendary creatures in this deck. We have Sverlun, particularly. We also have Kira sometimes. But when you have a Sverlun down, this only costs 3 to use. Remember that one. That can actually be a game breaker, that suddenly you remember, oh, yeah, I actually can both play the Lord and have Otawara mana up with my 5 mana because I have a Sverlun in play. Hugely important. And one of the things Otawara grants us is the tempo swing is important here. I think Otawara is... I saw a statistic saying, because everybody was talking about Boseiju, the new green channel land that'll be able to destroy an artifact or something like that. Great card. I'm not green, I don't know. But that card is good. But they actually could see from the statistics that Otawara had equal win rate. So the performance of Otawara is really strong, and people are starting to implement this in the card. I think people were sleeping on this in the start because they said it's too expensive. But one of the things this is so strong for Merfolk especially is that it gives us tempo. I used to play with something like Vapor Snag and Fading Hope and that type of effect, and I think those effects are great. But they're a bit narrow, and getting them on a land, opening you up to be able to play some other cards, that's great. You can still play bounce effects like Vapor Snag or Fading Hope, where you just bounce people's creatures. That's absolutely fine. But I think Otawara giving us that ability on a land is really strong. And I'm really glad about this effect, and I actually have won games on this. Another thing you need to be aware of with Otawara, why, yeah, it's expensive, that's fair, but it's so strong an effect. Two things. First of all, it's not a spell. It's not a spell, so they can't counter it. That's important. It's not a spell. So Teferi, which is one of the prevalent planeswalker in this, the 3 mana Teferi, that means that you can play instant speed effects. Yeah, fine, I can't, but I can channel my things. So you'll still be able to use Otawara even though Teferi is in play. Remember that can be really important. And being able to also use it on a permanent that has protection from blue. Also important. Sometimes we have, for example, Sword of Fire and Ice equipped to a creature. We want to bounce the creature. Now we can, with Otawara, we can bounce the creature. Imagine they have a Battle Scholar with a Sword of Fire and Ice on. Now I can bounce the Germ Token. That's really strong. So, really important. And also it's good against Hammer Time and Murktide, because you want to be able to bounce something, and this gives you another out for this. I think Otawara is so strong that it actually is correct to have not one, but 2 Otawaras in your deck. And then you need to be aware of, okay, what's going on then, because you can't, if you play down the second Otawara, if you sometimes have them in hand, you need to sacrifice one of them. But that can still be correct sometimes. I did it recently in a modern league because I needed to have 2 mana up. So I tapped the Otawara to do something, and then I played down the other Otawara, kept that one, and then I had 2 lanes up for Trickster that I needed. So that can also be relevant sometimes. The thing you need to be aware of when playing Otawara is that when you're looking at starting hands and you have a couple of weird lands, and it not, normally you like just to play out your islands first. You need to play out the islands first. That's really nice to do. You want to save the Otawara as long as possible. Also, much longer than Minamo and Oboro, because those are just fine to play out. Just get them out there. Their effect is happening on the battlefield. Otawara is best in your hand. So make sure that Otawara is you keep that. You keep that even before going in for something like, you can even consider using Waterlogged Grove before if your life total is not specifically important in that matchup. So keep it in hand if possible, because you might need that effect. Last land is Waterlogged Grove / Fiery Islet. This could be both of them. This is the Modern Horizons 1 lands that was a really nice design. A pain land that gives you a blue or green for Waterlogged Grove, or a blue or red for Fiery Islet. So yeah, we can't really use the mana that much other than the blue, but it's nice that it gives blue. But the effect of then being able to play 1 mana and tap it and sacrifice it when you get flooded is definitely outweighing the downside of paying 1 life for the blue mana. So I really like to play Fiery Islets as a ability to cash in a card, a land, when you are flooding out. And one of the things I experienced is that this is sometimes the first thing I do in my turn, is that when I'm a bit flooded and I top deck this, get it down, sack it, let's get some information. Let's get some information to define what we're going to use here. It's also something where you and your opponent's turn, if they do something and you sit there and say, I needed the Subtlety for his big threat now, or I needed the Force Negation, then you can crack your Fire Islet and hope to draw the safety net here. So I actually think this is a really important land, because it gives you some things where you can go all in on something like, we need to draw the Subtlety now to win the game, or we need to draw the Force Negation now to win the game. We need to draw the Trickster now to be able to tap down the last blocker. Let's go and tap it down with Fire Islet. One little keynote between the two differences here. These are one of the tools that you can use, because they haven't been printed in other color combinations yet. The green is relevant, of course, if you play a Simic version of Merfolk. And the red one can be relevant if you play Gutshot. We talked about Gutshot earlier. Yeah, I know that's a little change, but let's imagine that you actually are on 2 HP. Then you can't really throw, you can't play your Gutshot. But you can play it with Fire Islet from the tapping that one and taking 1 damage. So instead of 2 damage, you take 1 damage and you pay the mana for a Fire Islet. So just be aware that if you're running Fire Islet, you should be running, or if you're running Gutshots, you should be running Fire Islet. That's small details, but just be aware of that. That was the lands, and now we're gonna look on some sideboard cards. And of course, just a small reminder that I appreciate the positive comments I've been having, and I'm really glad to be doing this. And if you want to see more from me, remember to like the video and subscribe, because when I get enough subscribers, I also get more options to do more cool stuff for you guys. But let's look at the sideboard. One of the cards here that I really like, also because of it's an old school card, is Counterspell. There's a lot of different nice printings for Counterspell. It's a one of the original printed cards way back when. And Counterspell is something that you can definitely also play in the main deck, and I think it's worthwhile mentioning in here. I currently run it in the sideboard. I know people are running someone in the main deck, but it's a good catch-all. It simply says counter target spell. So when Subtlety is good against creatures and planeswalkers, and Force Negation is good against non-creature spells, well, Counterspell, they can actually take it all. So it's kind of like a good catch-all. And let's see which different printings we like here. This is actually a nice one, right? Really, really cool. But if we want to go old school, and we want to do that, of course, we should go all the way back to see the original. The original here, this is the limited edition beta. What a beauty. I love the black border. And this guy, what a bummer. He was doing the peace sign, and now he got cancelled out. That's a bummer. But love the original art, actually. I think that's really nice. And if you want to play with this card from beta, you can definitely pick it up on a cheap cost of 400 euros, which is more than $500, I think. So get those while they're hot. I myself, at the moment, I run actually with the one from Tempest. I think those are also pretty nice. But there are many different ways you can do with Counterspell. It's been reprinted a number of times, and it's actually because it's a really, really nice card. And it's a really well-balanced card. It's recently gone unbanned in Modern, and I think that's the correct thing to do. I don't actually know why it was banned in the first place. I know that they tried to balance this, making the cancel effect, which is 2 blue and 1 for a counter. It's just too slow. I think Counterspell is absolutely fine, because you have the downside of having to play 2 blue mana to counter it. It costs 2 blue mana, and that's actually something that's relevant. That is not it's not as easy to do. And of course, Counterspell is, I think, good catch-all. So you can definitely play that in your deck. But just be aware of that double blue is actually sometimes really difficult to hold up when you have Mono Walls and Cain of Souls, especially because Cain of Souls can't let you cast this. So it's not always a dream scenario. Imagine a situation where you have a Mono Vault, an island, or 3 islands and a Mono Vault, and you have a Lord you want to play. You can't hold up the Counterspell if you play the Lord. Oh, that's frustrating. So in that case, the Counterspell can sometimes be a drawback. Another thing I found with Counterspell is that it's a popular card. Many people are playing it. I also know that Murktide is playing it and stuff like that. But it signals so hard that you just leave up your 2 blue mana saying, oh, go, with 6 cards in hand. And the other guys, everybody know Counterspell, so they'll just say, that guy has a Counterspell. I recently played against the Murktide player. It was so obvious because he had a full hand, Dragon's Channeler out, and he held up 2 blue mana, or a red and a blue mana, Steam Vents and an island. And I just knew this guy had a Counterspell. So I actually think that you should sometimes don't get too pinned in on countering something with Counterspell. Many people think, I need to get the value out of this card. I need to hold it up right away. I think it's much better to deploy your threats, and then you'll just find something later on to counter. It'll get you value at some point. And of course, in combination with Trickster or some of the other flash type effects, it's really nice. I think you can consider in Counterspell's place is, of course, Mana Leak. Mana Leak is kind of the same effect, other than it lets the user pay 3 mana to nullify the counter effect. But it's only 1 blue and 1. So I have people talking to me about using that as well. And I like the Strongholds printing. I think this is really, really nice. This was the original printing of Mana League way back in, was it 1998 or something? Maybe, something like that. Back in the late 90s anyways. But you can consider this instead. It'll be able to counter many of the same things Counterspell can. Sometimes they'll have mana to play around it, but I think 3 mana is a lot, so that's why Mana League is actually really good. So you can consider that instead. Okay, next we wanna do something where we really hate on a specific card or specific deck, and we do that with Hercule's Recall. Hercule's Recall, 1 blue, 1 instant. I like instants. Return all artifacts target player owns to his or her hand. So it's not you either, Vials, or any artifacts you control. It's only the opposing artifacts. And there is a lot of artifact decks out there. The recent couple of years, they've been printing a lot of strong artifact pieces. We see something like Nettle Cyst, or we see all these construct tokens, stuff like that. And I think that Hercule's Recall is an extremely powerful effect. It's also a great old card. Let's see the original printing for Hercule's Recall, way back from Antiquities. So I always love playing these old ones. If you don't want to pay 90 euros for an original Hercule's Recall, you can go to revised version, which is also really nice. This lady is handling her business and putting stuff in the box. I like that. And definitely, I play with these ones from revised. They are like $3 or something, so $4 or something. Pretty cool. But it's a really, really powerful effect. Just be aware, don't use it too fast. This is a really game winning, and we always talk about sideboard cards. We want to have something that really have an oomph, that really can break the game totally in two. And Hercule's Recall definitely can do that. But if you use it too early just to get a couple of small value things out there, many of the artifacts deck, because they play Silverleaf Drum, or they play that new blue one, and they play something like Ursa, they'll be able to redeploy the entire hand easily, pretty fast. So make sure that when you do it, it's game breaking, and you can maybe even swing for lethal, kill them in a couple of 2 turns. It's also a matter of gaining the value from things, and it's not a card you want to use in all the situations. You want to use it against the artifact decks. You want to use it against something like Hammer Time. Specifically, but they need to have multiple artifacts for it to be strong. But I like it. Another thing we see a lot in the sideboards these days is Thieving Skydiver. Did I say I didn't like this? Thieving Skydiver. There it is. Thieving Skydiver, and you can even get it in this full art, which is kind of the same. Up to you guys. Thieving Skydiver is also a really cool card. I can definitely see that being played. It's a Merfolk, so that's great. It's a 2/1 flyer for 1 blue and 1. So that's already decent. And then you have the option of using Kicker, but your X can't be 0. But when you use Kicker and Thieving Skydiver enters the battlefield, you gain control of target artifact with converted mana cost X or less. And if that artifact is an equipment, you attach it to Thieving Skydiver. So the tech here is that someone was brilliant and saw that Hammer Time was getting big. They used Colossus Hammer. Colossus Hammer is a 1-mana artifact that gives +10/+10 or something. And that's pretty good to play 3 mana to steal that specifically. So if you meet a lot of Hammer Time, definitely play this card. But there's also other things you can do. You can steal your opponent's construct tokens. Just be aware that even though his construct tokens is 4/4s, you pay 3 mana, you take the construct token, now it's just a 1/1. That can still be a winning line, so definitely. But you can definitely consider the Thieving Skydiver. I think it has some utility. You can also steal Amulet Titan, the Amulet of Vigor. In my opinion, that's not that strong because it might be a little too late. When you finally can resolve this, he might have already gotten the value from the amulet. But it can be, of course, really strong. It's not bad, but sometimes it can be a little too late to do it. Thieving Skydiver, pretty cool card. You can definitely... It should be in your toolbox. I don't run it at the moment, but I have run it, played it a lot. So next is a really nice catch-all card. This is actually one of my favorite cards. Brazen Borrower. Brazen Borrower is this interesting card, and when they did the Throne of Eldraine, they had this adventure thing where you can play this card as a normal feature, which is a 3 mana, 3/1 flyer that can only block creatures, and it has flash. So you can play it instant speed, 2 blue and 1 mana. And that's fine. But the cool thing is that you can also play it as Petty Theft instead, where it's an instant that costs 1 blue and 1, and then you can return target non-land permanent and opponent control to its owner's hand. And when you do, it goes on an adventure, and then you can actually replay the creature part of it from the adventure. Okay, so this is a built-in 2/1, and this is one of the best, maybe the best adventure card. And this is a strong card also because it allows us to do some tempo plays. Brazen Borrower is good against many things like Murktide. You can bounce an opposing Murktide, you can bounce something like a hammer. So I really like this in the sideboard. You can even main deck it sometimes because it gives you some crucial tempo options. Something you need to be aware of is that it's only your opponent's non-land permanents. You can't save your own creatures. One of the reasons why people like Vapor Snacks or Fading Hope especially is that you can bounce your own creatures to protect them. So you can't do that with Brazen Borrower. You need to do something on your opponent's side. Another thing, when it's on the adventure, you can't use either vial to play it. And that's unfortunate. That could be pretty cool that you could, bounce something with Petty Theft and then either vial for 3, put it down. You can't do that. You need to pay the mana. You can of course either vial it if you have it in hand for 3. That's fine. You can do that. Don't get too greedy with the Petty Theft part. If there's nothing to bounce and your opponent passes to you and you sit with this in hand, it's a great way of using 3 mana in your opponent's instep. A 3/1 flyer is really strong in this meta, so I would definitely play that out. Don't get too clogged up on being able to get value from both parts of this. Another thing that's really cool about the card is that it gives us some interesting interaction against some of the decks that can be strong against us. For example, this is also kind of good against Goblin Charbelcher. Goblin Charbelcher is this weird deck that plays no lands, and then they use all these weird cards that this modal lands, and then they are dirtling around doing nothing, and then they're playing Ritual Effect, which means that they can put down a Goblin Charbelcher. That can, and when it activates, it kills you. Typically what they do is that they put down the Charbelcher in the round where they can't use it, and then they wait a turn, and then they use it next turn, and then they kill you. So you have one turn to do something about it. And bouncing the Charbelcher with Brazen Borrower will typically, or with a Petty Theft from Brazen Borrower, will typically be enough for you to come back to the game and regain your position, or even kill him off beforehand. So there are some clutch things you can do with bouncing this here. Yes, that's Brazen Borrower. The next card is also an Honorary Merfolk card. No, it's not really. Chalice of the Void is from Mirrodin and is a really, really interesting and complex card and difficult to play with. So you need to be aware what you're doing here. And it's a really potential card. It's a powerful card. If you're really into Old Border as I am, you can also get it in Old Border. My versions are in Old Border. It looks really cool in Old Border. I actually think it's really nice. But what Chalice of the Void does is that it costs XX, and it enters the battlefield with X charge counters on it, and whenever a player casts a spell with mana value equal to the number of charge counters, counter that spell. So you can play it for 2 mana, and then it has 1 counter on. You can play it for 4 mana, it has 2 counters on. 6 mana, 3 counters on, and forward. So if you pay it for 2 mana, it has 1 counter on, and all cards with 1 CMC converted mana cost, which I still call it, mana value, I think they call it now, it'll get countered. That's where the Tidetipper get countered and the Ether Vial. So when you play it for 1, be sure that you don't get your Ether Vial countered right after, because you look like a buffoon. And also be aware that Cain of Souls can actually help your Tidetipper. One of the things that's in my mind sometimes trick me is that the Tidetipper, hey, it's a 2-drop, I kicked it, I used a kicker on it, but my Chalice on 1, it doesn't care about the kicker, it cares about the converted mana cost on the Tidetipper, which is 1. But the reason why Chalice of the Void is really strong right now is that you can play it for 0. When you play it for 0, free spells can be played. And the Cascade decks, they play cards that cost 0. Crashing Footfalls, look at this, it costs 0. So when they finally do something like cascade into their living end or crashing footfalls, or all of these, there's many decks having different types of suspend cards that they can use it on. The Chalice of the Void will simply just nullify it, counter it. And even when you suspend a card like that, if you suspend crashing footfalls and you sit and wait, let's imagine you top deck it, and hey, next turn he's gonna play these 2 rhinos from the 1 mana suspend he did in round 1. Play the Chalice for 0, and it'll be countered in his turn, and he can't do anything about it unless he has an answer. The problem with Chalice right now is that printing of Beshaju and March of Olorworthy Light have given people some more main deck answers to the Chalice. But it's still strong, and I think you can still definitely play it in your sideboard. Especially in a cascade heavy meta. I think that is where it is strongest. Next card is, I want to talk about 1 mana counter spells in your sideboard. And one of my favorite 1 mana cards is Flusterstorm. I think it's really cool, especially this version from Modern Horizons 1. Let's see if we can get that up there. There it is. I think this art is so pretty. It looks nice. But let's talk about 1 mana counter spells. Flusterstorm is one of them. They can also be something like Spell Pierce. I also see a lot of people playing Spell Pierce. Kind of similar effect. 1 mana. This is the original printing from Zendikar. 1 mana counter target non-crit spell unless its controller pays 2. So it gives an out against the unfair decks, but it also can counter a Planeswalker or a burn spell from Burn or something like that. Flusterstorm is kind of a modern version of the 1 counter spell. Notice that it's not non-creatures, so you can counter Planeswalkers with Flusterstorm, but it's also a more expensive card, of course. You can get if you want to go budget route, Spell Pierce is really nice. It's actually pretty cool art from the Dynasty. I actually like that art. It's pretty nice. No, but yeah, these kind of things, they can protect your creatures for 1 mana. So consider siding them in against something like creature heavy removal decks like Junt. I think that's actually something you can consider. I would much rather side in Spell Pierce because it can also counter Junt's Planeswalkers. But one of the reasons why Flusterstorm is so strong is that it does say the following: counter target instant or sorcery unless its controller pays 1. And the reason why I compare it to Spell Pierce is that because he played a spell and you play a spell, it does have Storm. And when you cast a spell, copy it for each spell cast before this turn. You may choose new targets for the copies. That's interesting because imagine he's playing a spell, you want to counter that spell, then you play Flusterstorm, and it says counter target instant sorcery spell unless controller pays 1. But it copies, so we have 1 more, and they can just choose the same target, so it's the same effect now. So on a Lightning Bolt, Flusterstorm, on Spell Pierce, it's almost always the same effect. That's why I compare the 2. But why is Flusterstorm better? In some cases, it doesn't count on non-creature. The reason why Flusterstorm is really strong is that imagine you're playing against something like Storm. When they do something like using Empty the Warrens or something like Grape Shot. These 1 damage to the target, Storm. So the Storm decks, they play a lot of spells, then they play Grape Shot for 22 and say, haha, 22, what can you do? And normally you're sitting there with your counter spell saying, I want to counter one of them, but there's 21 more, what can I do? But here, if you play instead the Flusterstorm, it gets copies just as many times as the Grape Shot does, and you can just choose each of my Flusterstorm just counters your Grape Shot. You can pay 1 mana for each, of course, but I don't know how many mana you have. I don't think you have enough mana for this. So that's why it's really great. Another thing that's really good about Flusterstorm is against something like Force of Negation, because when opposing players use Living End, particularly in your upkeep, they want to play Force of Negation. They want to play Violent Outburst, having up Force of Negation for your counterspell, but then you have a 1 mana counterspell for theirs, and that's pretty neat. But the cool thing is that when they counter your counterspell with Force of Negation, that's a strong play for them because then they resolve their Living End. But they can't really counter Flusterstorm because Flusterstorm just copied itself. So that's 2 spells. So that's actually one of the really key reasons why Flusterstorm is strong against Cascade decks, because when they play the Violent Outburst, this is really technical, I know, but you're gonna get the story anyways. So when they play the Violent Outburst in your upkeep, and you have a Flusterstorm up, He'll play Violent Outburst. You'll say, copy Flusterstorm, target your Violent Outburst, you're tapped out. He'll play Force of Negation, but there's two things on the stack. There's two Flusterstorms on the stack. He can only counter one. So if you only have 3 mana up, that'll get countered. That's actually pretty strong. And last but not least, we're gonna talk about Graveyard Hate. And this is my favorite Graveyard Hate deck card. Relic of Progenitus is all the way back from Shards of Alara. It's been reprinted multiple times. I think I have it in Modern Masters 1, also pretty nice. Yeah, they never really updated the art. But Relic of Progenitus is a really, really good card. It's a 1 mana artifact that allows you to tap and choose target player, and he'll exile a card from his or her hand. So, sorry, that would be really strong, but from his or her graveyard. Okay, interesting. So it's kind of like this continuous effect, taking out one card from your graveyard, one card. And then why the card is really strong is that you have the option of also playing 1 mana and exile it, and then exile all cards from all graveyards, and then you draw a card. Really important. So Relic is really good early because you can control his graveyard, and that's important against Living End, Murktide, Dragonrage Channeler, especially in Murktide, and also Grixis Shadow, sometimes Croxa and stuff like that. There's a lot of cards that are banking on using the graveyard. There's even Archon and Persist decks that use the graveyard to reanimate a creature, stuff like that. Here Relic is amazing, and it's also amazing late because you can draw it, and then you can just play it for 2 mana. You'll cantrip this, exile all cards, and then get back here. One of the things that's important is that don't really be aware of when do you use the crack the Relic effect. It's really good because when they have something where they kill off your artifact, you want to keep up mana so you can save it and then draw the card so you don't go down on card value or card advantage. You'll get the card advantage then. But in general, it's at its best if it just continuously holds down his graveyard. So if you guys can continue to tap, then it's on its absolute best. And I think that in those games where you have a Relic up and running, it can be a game breaker. And also you can also do something like that against Undying creatures in Yawgmoth, where you can, when they go to the graveyard and they come back, you can exile the graveyard with 1 mana, and then they won't come back. You can also, if they only have 1 card in hand, you can just exile when it hits the graveyard, you can exile it, and then it doesn't come back. Relic is a great card. One of the things that's important is that you should be aware that you can also sometimes exile your own things with the tap effect. And that is really important against one of the big decks right now because they play with Drown in the Lock. Can I type that? Drown in the Lock. And Drown in the Lock says counter target spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. Destroy target creature with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in its controller's graveyard. So it always resolves around my graveyard. And that's why Drown in the Lock is a card that the Grixis Death Shadow deck are running. They have Thoughtseize, stuff like that. They have a removal spell. They can get a lot of things in the graveyard, and then they can counter Sverluns, and they can kill off creatures. So remember, the Relic can actually also exile cards in your own graveyard. And that's important because then you can actually nullify it. And let's imagine that you have a Sverlun out, you have 3 cards in your graveyard, and you have a Relic, and he uses Drown in the Lock on your Sverlun. That's fine, absolutely, bro. And you can just tap it and exile 1 card from your graveyard, and the Drown in the Lock will fizzle. Neat little trick you can do there. And that was actually the cards I wanted to show you today. So thank you for tuning in. I'm really glad that you wanted to see this walkthrough, and I hope you had some interesting inputs. I hope this was valuable for you. I know many of you probably know all the tips and tricks, but always fun to have a bit of discussion about our great cards in Modern Merfolk. And definitely, if I forget any cards, or if you have any more tricks that I haven't put in there, put that in the comments. It would be great for people to see some more neat little tricks you can do. There's probably a lot of cool things I've forgotten or don't even know about yet. So get them in the comments, and thanks for watching. I think it was just great to have a bit of a strategy talk here. I'll be doing a lot more content, having some more runs and some more versus games. So stay tuned for that one. And of course, if you like what you saw, give a like and a subscription. And you can also check another video I'll be putting out here, where I was actually playing a lot with the Mono Vault. A little bonus trick you can do that I forgot to talk about is actually, I forgot one card. Of course, we forgot about the Glasspool Mimic. We mentioned it a couple of times, but as a teaser, you can see a situation where I use Glasspool Mimic in combination with Mono Vault in a video called Power of Mono Vault, where I did some really neat tricks that you can do with Glasspool Mimic. I wanted to have mentioned that because many people play this card. I think it's great. You can use it as a land. It's a great turn one play. In many situations, you don't have a good turn one play because maybe you don't have an Ether Vial, you don't want to play your Tide Chipper yet. Then we can do something on turn one because we can turn our Mimic into a Shore. That allows us to have maybe 18 or 19 lands, and then 3 or 4 Glasspool Mimics. Glasspool Mimic, it's a clone effect, but only for your own creatures. So typically you are going to copy a Lord. But you can also copy Tricksters. And one of the things that you can do is that you can also copy Mono Vault. And that was what I did in that video, so check that out. If you activate the Mono Vault and you copy with Glasspool Mimic, you get another Mono Vault. And it won't die to mass removal. It'll simply work, especially as a Mono Vault does. So I love me a Glasspool Mimic. It's a great card. Notice that there's a really good to pitch to force negation and subtlety. It is a bit expensive for its effect, but you can also, when you tick up your vial, because you want to get it up to subtlety, you have something you can do on the way, and that's typically using it as a Glasspool Mimic as something you can put in. And you can copy Lords and Tricksters and even Silvergill Addicts if you want to draw cards. You can even copy something like Subtlety if you want to go all in and be the baddest mofo in the universe. That's pretty neat if you were able to do that. But in general, really nice little card as well. But if I forgot anything else, let me know in the comments. And this was fun, and I'm really glad that that you wanted to check it out. And hopefully you will have a fun time playing with Mono Blue Merfolk. And see you next time. Bye bye.